to start with today's very important webinar on pediatric ophthalmology. At the onset, a very good afternoon from my IIP to all the dignitaries on the dais. Friends, healthy eye and good vision play a critical role in the development of child. And babies learn to see over a period of time, much like they learn to walk and talk. They are not born with all the usual abilities they need in life. The ability to focus their eyes, move them accurately, and use them together as a team must be learned. Also, they need to learn how to use the usual information in order to understand world around them and to interact with them appropriately. And also, on all these factors, the growth of the child depends. Friends, as a general pediatrician, many times we fail to answer the queries by the parents regarding the various ocular problems of their babies and their dear ones. So today we have got the stalwarts in this field to answer all the queries more efficiently for us. Uh, so let us go ahead with this today's seminar. Over to Dr. Jayant Pandrikar sir, and I also welcome the today's panelist, Dr. Charuta Bape madam, Dr. Atul Seth sir, Dr. Raj Jay Bhandarkar sir, and my co-panelist, Dr. Sunita Ingle madam, our president, Dr. Jayant Pandrikar sir, and all the guests, Dr. Hemant Gangolia sir from Raigad. And today's our special guest is Dr. Amol Pawar, and he will be giving us some clues today for today's seminar. And over to Dr. Jayan sir for his presidential address. Jayan sir, please.
Thank you, Dr. Sadachar. At outset, I must thank once again our DIP team for giving this platform to learn for pediatricians for Maharashtra. Friends, we are having these webinars for pediatricians, and we have selected different topics. We have opted the subspecialty topics. We have covered few topics from pediatric radiology sonography. Then we have covered few topics from pediatric orthopedics, and now keeping in this tradition of subspecialty chapters, we are now coming up today with a very new webinar on pediatric ophthalmology. And I must thank and welcome our today's esteemed faculty, who is Dr. Atul Seth sir, who is ophthalmologist, and I also welcome Charuta Bapaye madam, who is ophthalmologist. So, madam and sir, we welcome you on behalf of Maharashtra IP to this platform. We have a guest among Dr. Hemant Bhai Gangolia, and of course we have one more guest who is a ever charming personality and who is celebrating his birthday, Dr. Jay Bhandarkar. Please give a big round of applause to Dr. Jay Bhandarkar on his birthday. We have our own treasurer of Maharashtra IP, Dr. Amol Pawar, as a guest, and we have two moderators from us only. They are pediatricians. One of them is Dr. Sadachar Ujrambakar, who is the secretary of Maharashtra IIP, and he is in charge of SNCU at Nashik Hospital. And we have one more moderator. I would say she's a pediatrician, but partly she's ophthalmologist as well, because her better half is ophthalmologist, so she knows ophthalmology. So ophthalmology is near her heart. So I welcome Dr. Sunita Inge madam, who is a president of Raigad IIP. I also welcome, I could see Dr. Mahesh Mohite on the platform. So I welcome Dr. Mahesh Mohite sir and Dr. Nilima madam. Friends, we all know very often these ophthalmic problems we come across as a general pediatricians, and pediatricians always face these problems when to refer, and because as a parents, they first believe in us. Even if we refer this patient to ophthalmologist, as we are primary care physician, so they come back to us and then ask us that my ophthalmologist has asked me to go ahead with this surgery or the laser surgery. When should I go ahead? Because they have more faith in us. And that's the very reason why we have come up with this today's webinar, that we should know. We come across with this squinting, we come across with the conjunctivitis, chalazion, ptosis, and all other conditions. And if, of course, as a neurologist, very commonly we have to send these patients for ROP, So as a pediatrician, we know when to intervene, when to send these patients, and how to counsel these patients. Because even after going to the ophthalmologist, they come back to us and then they seek our opinion. So, doctor sahab, kya karna chahiye? So we should know these things, and that's why to update our knowledge regarding pediatric ophthalmology, so we have invited and planned this webinar. So with this introduction, once again, I welcome our esteemed panelists, Dr. Atul Seth sir and Dr. Charuta Bapaye. And thank you very much. Over to Dr. Sadachar.
Thank you very much, sir. Over to Dr. Amol for his 2 words for this seminar.
I welcome all panelists, then speakers, and esteemed guests for who are attending this seminar. This is a very nice initiative under our of Maharashtra IP, Dr. Jayant Pandikar sir, and Secretary General Dr. Sadachar sir. This is a very good topic of ophthalmology. I welcome all on behalf of Maharashtra IP for this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Amol. Thank you very much. Over to Dr. Ingle Madam to introduce our speakers today, please.
म्यूट करा अनम्यूट केलंय का
Dr. Ingle Madam, can you hear us?
फ्रीज झाले होते फ्रीज झाले
तुम्ही बोला तोपर्यंत गंगुले सर काहीतरी 2 शब्द बोला
नाही अरे
इट्स ओके
it's all the best to this webinar, and it's very good initiative to have this the different things like we have already had one ortho and this ophthalmology, and probably we'll be looking forward to the skin also
Yes.
for the in future. So because many times as a pediatricians this specialty comes to us, so we are always in dicey situation what to do about it. So we'll have the valuable guidance from this both guest speakers who may have pioneers in their fields. I think so. Dr. Sunita is not there. Dr. Sadachar, तुम्ही मला वाटतं issue
I request Dr. Jay
She's there. She's there.
Say few
So
words.
sorry.
No, she is there. She is there. She is there.
Extremely,
Dr. Jay sir,
extremely
let
sorry.
Dr. Jay bhai say few words.
लेट हर स्पीक सर देन आई विल 1-2 मिनिटं बोलेन मी त्यांना मॅडमला बोलू द्या अगोदर
Okay,
मॅडम
okay, fine.
प्लीज
So sorry, the net connection went.
ओके इट्स ओके
Good afternoon, everyone. As a pediatrician, our main focus is always on growth, development, nutrition, vaccination of children. We hardly pay any attention to the eyes unless there are specific complaints or something grossly is abnormal with the eyes. But hence, we are likely to miss many ophthalmic conditions and will lead to late referrals. But we have our expert speakers, Dr. Atul Seth and Dr. Charuta Bapaye, who will enlighten us on ophthalmic conditions which need to be picked up by us. So there are going to be 2 sessions back to back, followed by question and answers. You can post questions in the chat box and they will be taken up later. First, let me introduce our expert, Dr. Atul Seth. Dr. Atul Seth is a pediatric ophthalmologist and strabismus specialist based in Nerul, Navi Mumbai. He is a medical director and consultant at IMAX Super Speciality Eye Center. He also consults at Lakshmi Eye Institute, Panvel, and Apollo Hospital. He has done his UG and PG from Sion Hospital and also holds DNB degree from New Delhi. He has many achievements to his credit, but the most important one is that he has been awarded prestigious fellowship in pediatric ophthalmology and strabismus by All India Ophthalmology Society in 2014. We welcome you, sir. Over to Dr. Sadachar for introduction of Dr. Charuta.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much. Dr. Charuta Manish Bapaye is MS, DO, DNB, FRCS, and FMRF. She is a pediatric ophthalmologist, and she is a director of Dr. Bapaye Hospital at Nasik. And her main interest is in pediatric ophthalmology. She is a throughout merit rank holder from all over her career, and she was the best outgoing student from VM Medical College, Solapur. and she has many achievements, which to sum up, I have some of these in her introduction. She is MS. She has done MS from Christian Medical College, Vellore, and she has got the state level gold medal in MS in Dr. MGR Medical University, Tamil Nadu. She has a fellowship in phacoemulsification at Salem Eye Hospital, Medanpalli, and Orbis International Fellowship in Pediatric Ophthalmology and Squint Fellowship from Shankar Netralaya, Chennai, Fellowship in Royal College of Surgeons, Glasgow, and she has been practicing in Nasik since 2006, and she has many attachments as a visiting pediatric ophthalmologist at many prominent schools in Nasik, and she also is gives lectures regarding ophthalmology and preventable blindness workshops at various places in Nashik. There is an illustrious biodata. I have shortened it because of lack of time. I welcome Dr. Charuta Bappe, and I request her to start her presentation. Over to Dr. Charuta Bappe.
Thank you, Dr. Sadachar. Good afternoon to all the pediatricians who have taken time out from their busy OPDs to be here today. I hope I'm audible.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, you are audible.
Okay. It's a real honor for me to be addressing you all today, and I really thank Dr. Sadachar and IIP for giving me this opportunity. I'm a pediatric ophthalmologist practicing in Nashik, and today I would be presenting an overview of pediatric ophthalmology from a pediatrician's point of view. As pediatricians, you see a child from the day the child is born. So the first question is, when does a child need an ophthalmic checkup? Now, as we all know, there are certain visual milestones that a child is expected to achieve during his development, the most prominent of which are a social smile by the age of 2 to 3 months. The child should be able to fix and follow objects and light by 3 to 4 months, and he should be able to reach out to objects and grasp them by the age of 5 to 6 months, and then it will continue from there. So ocular screening should begin when in the neonatal age itself, and this can be done in the pediatric OPD itself. All you have to do is just take a torchlight and do a gross examination, observe the pupillary reaction and a blink response to the light, and if possible, also get used to doing a Bruckner test or the red reflex. For that, you have to have a direct ophthalmoscope and view the reflection of the fundus from a distance of about 1 meter. If the reflex is red and equal in both eyes, it's normal. If the reflex is absent, that means either there's a media opacity or maybe a very high refractive error. If the reflex is abnormal, like whitish, then maybe you're looking at a fundus pathology. And if the reflex is unequal, then you may be looking at a squint or an unequal refractive error. Ophthalmic referral is a must, first and foremost, if the baby is premature or has had a stormy neonatal period. If there's a family history of a hereditary eye problem or a prenatal maternal illness, or very common in our country, history of consanguinity, or if in this examination you detect any sort of eye problem. For children who are about 6 months to 2 years, you have to note the pattern of the fixation and following to light or toys. That fixation has to be central, that is, the reflection of your torch has to fall exactly on the pupil or the center of the cornea. And when the child follows your light, it should be steady. There should be no nystagmus or there should be no searching kind of a gaze. The child should not resent occlusion of either eye, which means he's seeing equally with both eyes. As this baby is doing, he should also try to reach out to grasp your torch. The alignment of the eyes, which you can check again by the corneal reflex, should be central. The ocular motility of the child should be looked at, and just a torchlight inspection for any gross anomaly. So this can be easily done in your OPD itself. When do you need to refer? When you have a child like this, who is not fixing and following your light at all, because you may either be looking at an ocular pathology, or you may be looking at a cortical visual impairment, or it may just be a delayed visual maturation in which there's no neurological problem, but still the maturation is a little delayed. And also if the child has something like this, a nystagmus or a searching gait, then that needs a referral. These are some spotters which you can pick up directly in your OPD. This child here has a white reflex or a cat's eye reflex, or what we call leukocoria in both eyes. So he's likely to have a congenital cataract. This second child here has a ophthalmus and a steamy cornea. So here you're looking at a congenital glaucoma. This child here has a head-up posture with bilateral ptosis. This also needs a referral. This child down here has an anophthalmus where you hardly can see any eye. This child has a squinting at birth, which is an infantile esotropia. And this last child here has what we call the ocular digital reflex. This is very pathognomonic of Leber's congenital amaurosis, which is a visually severely compromising condition. On examination, the retina is normal. At the most, the child has a hypometropic refractive error, but this reflex, this rubbing of the eye or pressing of the eye is what clinches the diagnosis. After this, at around 2.5 years to 3 years before the child goes to school, at this age, whether the child has a problem or not, he should visit the ophthalmology clinic once. In this way, we can detect refractive errors, amblyopia, and strabismus at an age where it is really malleable to treatment. Now I'll move on to some ophthalmic pathologies that could present to a pediatrician, most common, of course, being a refractive error. Many times you would have patients complaining of all these symptoms like a headache, holding the book close, or it may just be recurrent styes or eye infections, or it may be squinting. So we may be looking at an undetected refractive error and we need to look into it. The question is, when do we prescribe glasses? How early? So even a child of a few months can be given glasses. But it's also necessary to remember that every child does not, like every small refractive error does not need to be prescribed in a small child. Many times we have people prescribing just 0.25 or 0.5 diopter glasses. The child doesn't really find any difference wearing the glasses, and it only leads to a fight between the parent and the child over its use. So there are certain specific guidelines where there is a threshold beyond which this refractive error is visually significant. And if that is met, then the child needs glasses, and then once prescribed, they should use it constantly. In children, there's no using it only for studying kind of thing. The glass has to be used constantly. In this context, I would also like to mention what's new in myopia. There is a lot of talk or studies going on about the role of sunlight exposure in preventing the progression of myopia. So indoor activity, near activity should be kept to the minimum, and there should be at least 1 hour of outdoor activity in the sunlight. Secondly, we also have dilute 0.01% atropine eye drops, which slow the rate of progression of myopia. They are marketed by various names like Myopin, Myatro, Atroped. The RCT has been done on them in the age group of 6 to 12 years old. It is not yet FDA approved, but it is being used widely in India and Southeast Asian countries where myopia is more rampant. But one point to remember in this is it works only in axial myopia, not astigmatism, not hypermetropia. It has to be started once or twice a day after we document a proper progression of more than 1 diopter a year. Just any child having myopia should not be prescribed the medicine. In the first 6 months, we need to note whether the medicine is really acting or not by noting the axial length and the change in the refractive error. And if it is working, then it should be continued for at least 2 years. So compliance is necessary. There's no point just putting it for 1 or 2 months and leaving it. So it's very important that if at all we are prescribing this, it needs to be started and monitored properly by pediatric ophthalmologists. It does not have any significant side effects, but there are a percentage of children who may not respond. If the refractive error is unequal, it may also lead to anisometropic amblyopia. The mainstay of treatment is still occlusion, where we occlude the good eye and force the weaker eye to work. But there's also an advancement or an adjunct therapy which has come into vogue, and that is it's marketed as Binox, but it's a dichoptic therapy which is given in the form of computer exercises, where two different stimuli of different contrast are given to the two eyes by dissociating them with red-green goggles. So in this, you're not closing any one eye, you're stimulating both eyes together. And so that's supposed to have better effects for developing binocularity. Though amblyopia can be treated till 17, 18 years of age, but the first 10 years are more critical. And so the earlier, the better. In this context, I would also like to just mention about the effects of the current increased screen time that we are seeing. The increased screen time doesn't lead only to eye strain, but we are actually seeing newly diagnosed myopes and progression of existing myopia in predisposed children. Now, it's not in our hands to reduce the screen time right now, but at least we can suggest some precautions like using bigger screens, proper posture. The child should be sitting on a table and chair with the back upright and the screen just below the eye level. The child should be encouraged to blink frequently and take adequate breaks between the classes. No watching TV or seeing mobiles between the classes. We can teach them the 20-20-20 rule, which means every 20 minutes, you take a break for about 20 seconds, close your eyes, or look at an object 20 feet away. The illumination of the screen and the room should both be moderate. The extra time that is spent on the screen apart from the classes should be minimized. And we can also prescribe ARC or anti-reflective coating glasses and lubricant eye drops for comfort. Now I'll move to the next topic, that is congenital cataract. Now, as pediatricians, you're aware of the systemic risk factors or associations with the congenital cataract, that is history of consanguinity, intrauterine infections such as torch infections, we need to screen for them, low birth weight, many times postnatal metabolic anomalies are responsible for the cataract like hypoglycemia, hypocalcemia, or galactosemia, which characteristically has an oil droplet cataract, or associated ocular anomalies or systemic syndromes like Down syndrome, Loeys syndrome, which have associated congenital cataracts. So while screening the child preoperatively, it's necessary to keep this in mind. And while giving a fitness as per NABH guidelines, it would be nice to mention everything in detail, like the weight of a child, the medical history, including the birth history, the nutritional status, growth and development, and immunization status. So now the mainstay of treatment is surgery, but at what age can we do it? Well, after, it's as early as the child is fit for GA, but after 4 weeks of age, because too early surgery leads to risk of glaucoma. So after 4 weeks, anytime. And if it's a bilateral surgery, then usually a gap of 1 week is ideal between the two surgeries. I do not advocate bilateral surgeries at all at the same sitting. These, thank you, Dr. Atul, for these wonderful pictures. These are just showing the steps of pediatric cataract surgery, which are a little different from that of adults. As seen in the first picture here, an incision is being made. In the second picture, we have the anterior capsule being peeled off, which is also technically more difficult in children. In the third picture, we have the cortex being aspirated, the lens matter. This is one step which is totally different from adult cataract, because in children, the posterior capsule and the anterior vitreous face opacifies after the cataract is removed. So we need to do a posterior capsular rhexis where we remove the central part of the posterior capsule. And then we also do an anterior vitrectomy, and then we inject the lens. If this is not done, then no matter how good you do the other steps, the child is not going to have a good outcome. So it's very important to do this meticulously. And why is a pediatric ophthalmologist important in this is because, one, like I said, steps of surgery are different. Pre-op counseling is very essential, and there are certain nuances of IOL power calculation which need to be taken in account, because if we just put lenses like we put in adults, making the child emetropic, then later on he's going to develop a high myopia. So we need to calculate all that properly. And most important thing is that the surgery is just one step. After that, the post-op visual rehabilitation with glasses, the occlusion therapy, the follow-ups, the IOP checkups, all that is as important, and many times that is neglected. So it's very important to pay attention to all that for a good visual outcome. The next thing is a congenital nasolacrimal duct block. Dr. Sadachar, I hope I'm getting through to everyone.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So the next thing which you would see commonly in a pediatrician's OPD is this. The child will have watering and discharge since birth. So it's very easy to diagnose, because if you press at the region of the lacrimal sac, then you will see regurgitation of pus from the corner of the eye. That is called the Ropla's test. Regurgitation on pressure on the lacrimal sac. Another test which can be done easily in the OPD is a fluorescein dye disappearance test. This picture again, thank you, Dr. Atul. The fluorescein dye itself is orange. It's instilled into both the eyes, and then we visualize the result with a blue filter after 1 minute. If the drainage of tears is good, like is seen in the left eye of the baby, then there's no pooling of the dye. But the right eye, since the nasolacrimal duct is blocked, we see a pooling. So that means that there is a duct blockage. So what do? Antibiotic drops are prescribed. Moxifloxacin is a good option. And the proper technique of massage needs to be explained to the patient. The massage should be down and in on the lacrimal sac region itself. There's no need to pull the finger down right up till the end of the nose. So the pressure should be towards the nose and on the lacrimal sac. By doing this, we are creating a pressure so that the flimsy obstruction that is there at the end of the nasolacrimal duct, that just gives way due to our pressure. And we are also emptying the sac in the process to prevent an abscess formation. So this has to be done about 10 times a day, 10 times at one sitting, 4 times a day. Now, if this does not work till 1 year, then the ideal time for probing under GA is 1 year. We should not delay it further, because then the success rate is going to come down. If at all it has to open on its own with massage, it will till 1 year. After that, probing. And if there's an abscess formation, then sometimes we need to give systemic antibiotics, and we may need to resort to an early probing also. The next condition that we may come across, though it's not so common, is a congenital glaucoma. These children need examination under anesthesia for their intraocular pressure. They can be given interim drops to control the pressure, but the mainstay of treatment is surgery, which has to be done at the earliest. Next, we come to congenital ptosis. Now, it's very important to understand that ptosis is not only a cosmetic condition. The eye which is ptotic can also have monocular astigmatism, and it can also turn amblyopic. So it's necessary. So it's not okay to say that anyway it's cosmetic, we'll treat it when the child grows up. No, you may do the surgery late, but you need to examine for these conditions. And if they're present, glasses and occlusion have to be given at an early age. If the child is very young, at the time that the baby is awake, we can tape the lid up for just to buy time, so that the eye receives stimulation and doesn't end up into stimulation deprivation amblyopia. And then we can do a frontalis sling surgery at the earliest. But if the visual axis is not obscured, then there's no hurry for the surgery. The ideal age would be 3 to 4 years. And there are two options, a frontalis sling, if like it's a severe ptosis, or a levator muscle resection. Another common thing which you would definitely be seeing in your OPDs is conjunctivitis. It's very important to note whether it's an allergic or infective one. The important points are generally an allergic conjunctivitis has a chronic history. It's been happening for some time, whereas infective is acute. Allergic conjunctivitis mainly has itching as the presenting symptom, whereas infective has pain. Allergic conjunctivitis has watering, whereas infective conjunctivitis has purulent discharge. And the most common clinching thing is to ask the patient whether the eyes are stuck when the child gets up, then it is infective. Allergic conjunctivitis has a white ring around the limbus because of those Tranta spots. Whereas in infective, there's no white ring, but there's lid edema, as you can see in this picture. And there's also a formation of a pseudomembrane in infective conjunctivitis. So as pediatricians, if you're sure that it's allergic, then you can start lubricants or mast cell stabilizers like olopatadine. But if you're in doubt whether it's infective or allergic, better to start lubricants and an antibiotic drop and refer to an ophthalmologist at an earliest. Steroid drop should not be started without a slit lamp examination, because if it is an infective pathology, if there's some erosions on the cornea, then starting steroids is only going to worsen the course of the disease. Next, I come to a topic which is very dear to all your hearts, and that is retinopathy of prematurity. Here, both pediatricians and ophthalmologists share a great responsibility, because it's going to change the future of what we do at this age is going to change the future of the child entirely. So which babies need to be screened for ROP? One thing is if the gestational age at birth is less than 32 weeks, if the birth weight of the baby is less than 1,500 grams, or if the child has had a stormy postnatal course, regardless of the weight. Initially, hyperbaric oxygen used to be stressed a lot as a risk factor, but it's not so much so important. So now, when does the child have to be screened first? So the first examination should be at 4 to 6 weeks of chronological age, or earlier if the birth weight is low. It is done with an indirect ophthalmoscope only with dilated pupils. We use dilute tropicamide drops and view with a 20 diopter or 30 diopter lens. It can be done in the NICU if the baby is unstable, or it can also be done in the ophthalmic OPD, and is generally done by either retina specialists or pediatric ophthalmologists. Now, what exactly do we screen for when we see the baby? We need to check if any part of the retina is yet to be vascularized. And it's usually the temporal crescent that remains avascular till the end, because that's the last part of the retina where the normal blood vessels are going to come in. So is any part of the retina avascular? And because the retina is avascular, because of that avascular stimulation, whether there is presence of abnormal blood vessels or neovascularization in the retina, which in future are going to bleed, are going to trouble the retina, whether you see any neovascularization and its further consequences. So that's precisely what we are looking at. So when we look into the fundus, we generally see these stages. We stage the disease. So the first stage is just a demarcation line where you can see some part of the retina vascular, and beyond that, there are no vessels. That's stage 1. In stage 2, the new vessels have started doing their dirty work and they're sort of pulling at the retina. So it's an elevated ridge. In stage 3, those abnormal new vessels are now proliferating into the vitreous cavity, and they're causing an extraretinal proliferation. In stage 4, that proliferation is contracting and it's pulling at the retina, and there's a partial retinal detachment. And in stage 5, which is like really bad, that is total retinal detachment. And we hope we never get to see this stage. Along with the staging, as examiners, we also need to note the zones. any disease that is present at the posterior pole around the optic disc, that is zone 1, is bad. Then beyond it comes zone 2 and zone 3 is okay. And we also need to note how many clock hours of disease there is, because all this is going to decide the treatment. Now, so how do we follow up and when do we decide to treat? Now, if at checkup, we find there may be certain premature children where the retina is already vascularized. So that's fine. Then you just follow up the child at 1 year. Then there may be a category of children where we find that the temporal crescent of the retina is avascular, but there is no neovascularization. So in this case, you don't do anything, wait and watch, follow up at weekly intervals till the vascularization is complete. Now comes the next category where you have neovascularization. So in that case, like I said, we note the stage, zone, and clock hours of the disease. And there is a certain guideline where there is the threshold ROP, which is like beyond stage 3. And if it has reached that stage, then we need to treat as a semi-emergency within 48 hours. What treatment is done? Well, for threshold ROP, we do a diode laser. And there is a certain category called aggressive posterior disease, or APROP, or plus disease. Here, we inject intravitreal anti-VEGF injections into the eye. It's done under aseptic precautions, but you can do it under topical anesthesia, just restraining the baby. So there is no question of fitness for GA in this. So now we have done the laser or we have given the injection, then again we continue following up till the degree we see that the disease is regressing and till the vascularization is complete. If the retina is already detached, then it directly becomes a case for surgery. Then other things are not going to work. After this, the story of premature infants does not end here. After 1 year and every year thereafter, also we need to keep looking for squint, myopia, and amblyopia and treat accordingly. Now coming to the end of the talk, this is just one slide to mention how a retinoblastoma can appear to us. So in the OPD, you may just see it as a white reflex or proptosis or just redness or squint or phthisis. So any ocular pathology, beware that it could be a sign of a retinoblastoma. And if you diagnose and refer early, then you can save both the life and sometimes the vision of the patient. And here I would definitely request everyone to please, in this case, specifically tell the patient to go to an ophthalmologist, because there are many optometrists who are practicing as ophthalmologists, and we have seen them just sitting on it for about 6 months and wasting precious time of the baby. So the child directly needs to go to a specialist. At the end, just some spotters for ocular manifestations of pediatric systemic diseases. This figure on the left is a cherry red spot, or which is seen as a red spot on the fovea surrounded by a white ring, and it is seen in metabolic storage diseases. I'm glad that I'm talking to an audience of pediatricians, so I don't need to go into the details of what storage disorders they can be. This second figure shows a KF ring, which is seen as a brown-green ring at the limbus, and it is a pathognomonic sign of Wilson's disease. And Wilson's disease also has a cataract in association, sunflower cataract. This is a vortex keratopathy, which are lines seen on the cornea in Fabry's disease. This picture here shows a retinitis pigmentosa, where you have attenuated vessels and black bony spicules. This plus deafness is a sign of Usher's syndrome. Child here has a Sturge-Weber syndrome, and this child needs an ophthal referral because he may be having an undiagnosed unilateral juvenile glaucoma. And if we don't diagnose it and treat it on time, he may lose his vision to glaucoma. This second picture here has a subluxated lens, which is seen in Marfan's syndrome. And last is albinism. though we cannot change the course of albinism, we need to screen them because sometimes they have high refractive errors. So even if we can't treat the foveal hypoplasia, we can at least treat the refractive errors so the vision improves. Thank you for your patient listening, and I hope this was a useful talk.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Charuta, madam. It was, I think, a very illustrious talk and very useful for general pediatricians and to know when to direct patients to the ophthalmologist. And you rightly said, don't sit on the disease, intervene in time and intervene with this pediatric ophthalmologist especially, and avoid the intervention by the optometrist. That education we need to definitely to give to the patients. Our next illustrious speaker is Dr. Atul Seth, sir. I request Dr. Atul Seth, sir, to start his presentation.
Yeah. Sorry. I'm just. Am I audible? Should I? Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Am I audible, sir? Dr. Sadachar, can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Yes,
No
sir.
issue.
Yes, you are audible.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yes,
So-
sir, you are audible.
Is my network okay? Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, sir. Go ahead, sir. It's okay. PPT is okay. You're audible. So go ahead.
Yeah, so everybody can see my screen, right?
Yes, PPT is okay. Your voice is okay. Go ahead, sir.
So Dr. Charuta has made my job quite easy. She has had an exhaustive presentation on the visual milestones, and that has made it easy for me. Now the only one more important part of pediatric ophthalmology which cannot be ignored is a squinting child. And as my teacher has always said, it's a very lovely branch. Unlike the rest of ophthalmology, it doesn't require too many expensive equipment, and it needs a little bit of knowledge and a little bit of tricks of how to examine a child. So when we say squint, there are a lot of questions with the pediatricians face, and that is the reason of this talk, because whatever we tell them, you are the people who are first going to refer them to us, and then whenever we advise anything, you are the ones whom they're going to come and ask, that should we go ahead and do this treatment. So there has to be something, what you say and what I say should be matching. So any misalignment, any true misalignment of the two eyes will be a squint. It can be either since birth or it may be acquired later. And if this occurs in the visually immature period, which most of the times it does, that is, as Dr. Charuta pointed out, it was below 8 years, it will have a permanent effect on the vision as well as the 3D vision or the binocularity. We can classify them in various ways. So one I already told you was congenital or acquired. It can be either the squint is inward, which we call esotropia or convergent squint, or it can be outward, that is divergent squint or exotropia. Now you will see a set of patients, especially in divergent squints, who will, they will squint for a while. That is the initial presentation, and then they will get back the alignment. So this is an intermittent squint. And as against that, you will have a set of patients who will always show a squint, that is a constant squint. The concomitant squint is the regular variety that we see, which is the non-paralytic variety. And of course, the more complicated or the incomitant or the paralytic squints, which need a totally different management. In certain cases, they need neuroimaging. So of course, sometimes they can be the first presenting sign of a neurologic emergency. Primary versus secondary is, when we say secondary squint, it means that if somebody has a cataract, somebody has a retinoblastoma, somebody has a congenital retinal toxoscar, and their eye is secondarily squinting, that is known as a sensory squint, as against a primary squint where there may be some problem with the binocularity or with the, with the tight muscle. So that will be a primary squint. So basically the retina, the vision of the child is much better in a primary squint. As against that, a sensory squint, we can't do much about the vision. We can only give them a cosmetic alignment. Visual maturation has already been covered. I would just like to highlight here that though we say that the plastic period is still about 8 to 9 years, the binocularity develops by the age of 2 years in the visual cortex. And so the most rapid development occurs in the first 2 years. The fovea develops by the fovea, the center of the retina, develops by the first 4 months of age. So beyond that age, the child should be fixing centrally well and following well, close to face. Any squint beyond 4 months of age would be considered abnormal. Before that, you may be having a little bit of physiological divergent squint intermittently and occasionally. Accommodation also is developed by the age of 6 months. So any child with a high refractive error can demonstrate a squint between 6 months, beyond 6 months of age. Now, let's just come to the common questions that you as pediatricians have encountered or encounter every day. Sometimes they say, I feel that the child has a squint. Sometimes you feel that the child has a squint, but the parents are not, have not observed that. Second, if the child has a squint, when should we go? I think partly Dr. Charuta has given the answer that, beyond very early, if there's a white pupillary reflex or anything, as soon as you see it. If you feel there is a squint, probably I would say 3 to 4 months of age. Beyond that, once they must go and seek a pediatric ophthalmologist's opinion. Then the parents are concerned. If there is a squint, their major worry is not cosmesis. Their major worry is, can my child see properly? Is his vision okay? And lastly, though the treatment is what we have to do, but the moment we advise, you are the first person whom they're going to come and ask that I have been advised.
Badwan.
Yeah.
Badwan, कौन है Badwan?
Hello.
Amol, mute करा.
Should I go on? Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You carry on.
So, the first question. This already you have seen in a video that you just flash a torch, and here you can see that this child has a true squint. When you flash a torchlight and you see that this reflex is not falling in the pupillary area, it's falling eccentrically, either inward or outward, this is a convergent squint. Now, when you feel that this child has a squint, the next test which you also can perform in your OPD is, even if you don't have an occluder, you can use your palm and do an alternate cover test. Let's have a look at this video. Now, by the look of it, this girl seems to have a right divergent squint. The right eye seems to be divergent. Now, if we just do an alternate cover test, you see now the right eye moves into take-up fixation. So even in a small child, you don't use this occluder because they get intimidated by this occluder. We can just use our thumb or our finger to block. And instead of the light, we can even show them a toy which they would be interested in. And we can make sure by the alternate cover test that there is a true squint. So when I say true squint, let us tackle pseudo squint. A lot of children, you'll see that the parents will tell you in the photographs, the child seems to have a squint. So this is a common entity. If you see this, if you see this child, she seems to have a squint. But if you see the light reflexes, both are very much centered. The reason is that this child has got epicanthal folds which are covering the inner white of the sclera and has a wide intercanthal distance. So this is giving the appearance of a pseudo squint. Of course, you have to doubly check by doing an alternate cover test. And even if the parent feels that there is something wrong with the child, you should always do a dilated examination, get it done once, and have a look at the fundus so that we don't miss the high refractive errors. But this is what we call pseudo-convergent squint. So most of the times when such children visit an adult ophthalmologist in a busy cataract OPD, frankly, you don't have time to see them. And we tell them, they are told that, you come later, we'll have a look at you, grow up and then get the child. Any child can easily be seen. Most of the important information we get without any sedation or anesthesia. We must have a look at the fundus, and it is very easy to do a manual retinoscopy to get a rough or I would say rather accurate idea of the refraction of the child. So, missing anything will amount to an error of omission. Now, when should we seek an opinion? I would like to show you, I love to show this photograph of my daughter when she was around 6 weeks. If you see this, she seems to have a right divergent squint. So as I pointed out, the foveal maturation is complete by the age of around 4 months. So any squint beyond 4 months, now by the age of 4 months, she was aligned. So we would not give much importance to this, but of course we do have a look at the fundus and make sure everything is okay, even at this age. But beyond 4 months, any form of squinting is not normal. Now, just to reinforce that we should never send away a child without a dilated examination, this is an example where a mother took the child at 5 months, then took again at 8 months, saying that there was something amiss, but because it was a small baby, she was sent away saying, no, it seems okay. And at around 1 year and 2 months, when I dilated, I could see that this was a bilateral retinoblastoma. I'm sure none of us would want to, have this on our hands. Now, the visual potential, I think this partly has been covered by Dr. Charuta. Let me give you some simple tricks in the clinic that you can make out. One is, of course, the pupil. And it is important to impress upon the parents that the child who has a squint may be doing everything normally and performing all the tasks normally, because they will have monocular amblyopia, very dense visual loss in one eye, and still carry on everything normally. So unless you impress this upon the parent that, the other eye can be potentially blind if you don't go for early treatment, they will not really go to seek an opinion. So because one eye is squinting, there is a diplopia, the child having visual plasticity, they start suppressing that eye, and then it leads to dense amblyopia. And the earlier this is reversed, the better. Convergent squints are really dangerous in terms of causing amblyopia, and they need very aggressive management, both in terms of patching treatment as well as surgery. Whereas the divergent, especially the intermittent variety, we go a little slow on that. We do the more the non-operative part of the treatment, like giving the right glasses, giving occlusion treatment. And we try to carry these children till the age of about 4 or 5 years, where we can get a good measurement, make a good plan, and then we prefer to operate them if required. So indirectly, we can assess by taking a colored toy around and seeing how the child is fixing. Generally, in the first 1 month, after the first 1 month, there is horizontal following. Generally, another month after that, you will have, by 8 weeks, you will have vertical gaze tracking. And a very good test is when you can, if you're suspecting something wrong with one eye, you can occlude the other eye and see how much the child is resisting it. So I think this video will depict that. Now we have a child who has a left convergent squint, but the mother is not ready to seek an opinion. How you can demonstrate to them is by doing this occlusion of the better eye. The moment you cover the left eye, the child just does not seem to like it. And when we cover the left eye, he has no problem. So once again, an inexpensive 10 rupee toy can be a very helpful tool in examining this child. And it really helps you in motivating the mother to go and seek an opinion. These are for the child who are between 2 to 4 years of age. Dr. Charuta already showed you these picture charts. So it's not that we can't assess their vision. We can assess them, we teach them about these symbols and they answer. We can objectively assess their vision with the help of these picture charts. And finally, if there is something which is not adding up, we may resort to electrophysiology, though it is not the first line of treatment, but if there is some occipital injury. So ERG, if we are thinking of a fundal pathology, or a visual evoked response is an important tool, though it doesn't really substitute our clinical examination. In certain cases, like in this child whom I was patching for a fairly long time, but was not responding to my treatment. So I guess there was something wrong. And when I got an MRI done, I could see an occipital region scar. So lastly, very quickly, the treatment options. I find it easy to remember it like the 4 O's. The first one and the most important one, no substitute for it, is optical treatment, that is glasses. The second is occlusion treatment, that is patching. The third, less important and useful only for the bigger children, but of late it is gaining importance as vision therapy. It is called vision therapy. It can be done on the computer. It can be done at home. And lastly, equally important, when nothing works, the operation, the surgery. So now we need to get over this, first we need to get over this myth that children have to get operated only beyond a certain age. You'll see so many times they are being told, "Zara mote ho diya, takat ho diya." I don't know where this advice has come from. It's not given in literature. So for had he been operated, if occlusion would have been done in childhood, he would have vision in that eye also, which is more important. So glasses can be given as early as beyond 6 months of age, or when the child starts head holding, sometimes even before that. And even from the age of 1 year in divergent squints, they form a very important part, and these are the most difficult to enforce. So after we give them glasses, I think it's the pediatrician's job to keep reinforcing when the child comes to them, telling the parents that, you need to continue wearing glasses, because that can never be overemphasized. And very often we treat about, I think, 50 to 60% of our children just with proper glasses and occlusion treatment. Most of them don't need surgery. A refraction need not always be under atropine. Sometimes in divergent squint, we resort to short acting drops. So, or during school going days, we don't use atropine, we do it with shorter acting ones. But in certain cases, we do need to use atropine. A point of caution, you should know that, you may sometimes get children who have been, they go into a psychosis because of too much of cyclopentolate instillation. So atropine, we always use an ointment in children, and cyclopentolate also has to be used with caution. Too much of cyclopentolate can cause them to have typical symptoms of atropine toxicity or cyclotoxicity. Now, this is just to show you that this is a variable angle convergent squint. If you see a child who sometimes appears straight, and then suddenly when you show them an object of interest, they squint, and even the parent will tell you sometimes they are squinting, sometimes they are looking straight. That is most likely going to be it's an accommodative esotropia, and just timely glasses are the most simple and beautiful treatment. All you need to do is keep telling the parent that this is not a 5-month or a 1-year treatment. This child generally will have glasses in his childhood, may carry it in his adulthood also, but then this is the simplest and the most non-invasive treatment one can have. Amblyopia is reversed by patching, but I would like to please point out that there are some alternative treatments. When we give them occlusion, when they go to the optician gives them this rubber patch, and or they give them a ground glass kind of glass in the better eye. Now, this is the most useless therapy, because the child keeps peeking over the glass, and it will have no effect whatsoever. It just gives the parents a false confidence that they're doing some treatment. So the occlusion has to be total occlusion. Orthoptics, these are the older modalities, but what we actually use now is vision therapy, mainly for divergent squints, for amblyopes who are resistant to patching, and that is known as Binocs. The compliance has increased a lot with that. So, but that has a limited role, but it is an upcoming branch in squint. Now, surgery in a convergent squint, we generally prefer that after 6 months, if the child has a constant convergent squint, we prefer to operate as early as possible, and definitely so before 2 years of age, if you really want to restore some sort of binocularity. If it's a divergent squint like this child, we generally don't operate them very early if they are holding the eyes for a fairly good amount of time. But if they break down, as this child did, he has become a constant squint, we definitely resort to an early surgery. So this is a divergent squint which was corrected with a left eye surgery. In children with cerebral palsy, or there is a variable angle squint, some neurological issue, uncontrolled epilepsy, we generally are a little conservative, and anyway, even if we operate early, we generally don't gain too much binocularity. So we prefer to delay the surgery a bit till we can get a stable angle and the systemic issues are a little under control. Now you see a lot of these ads. The biggest problem is that the moment we advise any treatment, the parents, and especially if we advise surgery, the parents resort to all sorts of other, treatments, which are, I think, given to them by their relatives and their friends and so-called well-wishers. I think it's just a waste of time and money. And especially, even I have seen ophthalmologists prescribing drugs like B-Plex, Oculest, iTone. Now this iTone is not going to give any tone to your muscles. So it's a waste of time. So if you see any of them using all this, I think you should advise them that, you want to take another opinion, go to another pediatric ophthalmologist, go to 5 of them. And if all of their opinion match, please go ahead and do the surgery rather than go to an alternative branch altogether. There are certain special forms of strabismus. I'll quickly run through them. Here the child may present with a face turn or a movement deficit. And in certain cases, if we are very sure of the diagnosis, we don't need a neuroimaging, like in a congenital fourth nerve paralysis. Just old photos are good enough. Then there are certain fibrotic muscles where they will cause a squint, but the squint is not very large. So child may not present to you with the squint. Like here, this child, if you see this video, had a face turn to the left side. But if you straighten her face, you will see a left convergent squint. And you see a limitation of the left eye abduction. The left eye does not go outward. A very important point to make here is that this is Duane's retraction syndrome. This is not a sixth nerve paralysis. Sixth nerve paralysis is far less common, and Duane's retraction syndrome is far more common. This occurs because of a co-contraction of the two muscles of the medial and lateral rectus. And this doesn't need any neuroimaging whatsoever. In certain cases where there's a face turn, there's a lot of narrowing, surgery is recommended. Otherwise, we just do a refraction if there are glasses and amblyopia, we treat that. This point I made because a lot of these children sometimes reach us with a CT scan in their hand. And if probably we would have seen them earlier, we would have said this is Duane's retraction, no need for any neuroimaging. They are mistaken as sixth nerve paralysis. Another thing is, if you see this child, there's a slight chin up posture and a face turn to the other side. But if you straighten the head, you see that this right eye is a little outward and downward. Here there is a tight superior oblique muscle which does not let the eye elevate. So here the parent will tell you that there is a face turn, and they will say that sometimes the child squints. Like when the child looks up to the parent, he will be squinting, but they're not very sure. And when you see the child like this, you don't pick up a squint. Some of them are even treated for orthopedic torticollis, and they've gone a lot of places. So if we just pick this up, we'll probably stop at that. Only in few of these patients, we do a surgery. If the straight ahead position is good, if the head turn is not significant, we generally avoid a surgery. So there are a lot of myths about squint surgery, since that's the last thing I'm talking about. First of all, it's an extraocular surgery. There is no risk of vision loss in squint surgery. There is no scar on the face that is seen. So, there's an unnecessary fear that nishan aa jayega and all that. And one very important advice which is given by a lot of times by the general practitioner is ke motha ho gaya, 18 varsha ho gaya, then we will see. So I don't know. I never read this advice. And once done, the squint cannot be repeated. Again, if they've had a squint surgery which is not successful, all the squint guys, I think about 10 to 15% of our surgeries are repeat procedures. So you can easily isolate the muscle, even if it has been done somewhere else, and rectify it. So this myth also that, ekda zhala operation, parat nahi karu shakat, no, that's wrong. You can easily rectify it. So I would just briefly show you, when I say it's an extraocular procedure, this is a muscle weakening procedure. Essentially in squint, we either do a muscle weakening or a muscle tightening procedure. This is also a small mini incision kind of incision in the lower fornix, so it will be hidden. It is hardly seen. Here we are isolating the lateral rectus muscle. After we have isolated the muscle, we take sutures in that muscle. Once we have cleaned the muscle, and see here, at no point we are perforating the eyeball. After taking absorbable sutures, we will just cut the muscle from where it is attached on the sclera. I'll just turn it a bit faster. And what we have to do is that, because like this is a divergent squint, so we have to attach this muscle a little behind so that we induce a slack in it. This is a muscle weakening procedure. After a measurement, which depends on the angle, we will stitch it on the sclera. So here the muscle is stitched on the sclera. We reconfirm the distance and then we close the conjunctiva. And this is a newer technique called fornix incisions. So they're not at all irritating. This is an absorbable Weichel suture which will just go by itself. And same thing, if we want to tighten a muscle, we shorten it. As I already told you, the eye looks a little like this on day 3. By day 10, the conjunctival wound has healed. The child is fit to go to school. And of course, there's a world of difference. This is a divergent squint. Here, sometimes what we do is we operate only one eye. So, sometimes we operate one eye, sometimes we operate both the eyes. So the parents are a little concerned. Once again, since it's not an intraocular procedure, there's no risk of infection inside the eye as you hear in cataract or glaucoma. So there's nothing to worry in terms of vision. The only thing is the child should be fit for GA. And you should be doing at a place where you have good anesthetist and good anesthetic facilities. Cost of surgery, it's not very costly. Of course, I'm sure Nasik must be cheaper than Bombay, but let me say roughly about maybe 35 to 55, 60,000, but we never send a child back. We have done non-affording patients for whatever, even at the cost of surgery. Here we go to Bhuj every year, Vidada, and we do about 20, 25 patients totally free of cost. I think that's the most rewarding visit in the year that I get. And so we'll never send a child away. Maybe an adult, we'll tell him you come later. As you see here also, there is only one adult. He was last on the list, in the preference list, because we first operate children, because we know that we are not doing only cosmesis. We are saving vision in that.
Right.
So I hope if we all work together, we will have a lot of children thanking us. Yeah. And I think we are now open to questions.
Yeah.
I'm sorry if I overshot my time. Do we have time?
Yes. Squint.
I'll stop my screen.
Jay, 1 second. Squint can't wait because the causes are varied and therefore they have to be evaluated, and early intervention is must because it might it definitely determines the outcome, visual outcome. And as sir rightly described, the simple occlusion test which we can do in the OPD can really help us a lot. And so thank you so much for an excellent presentation with crystal clear take-home messages. You made a complicated topic. I mean, it is for us complicated, so easy to understand. So I thank you so much, sir. Before we move to question and answers, I think Dr. Jay wants to say something.
No. I can say one of the excellent presentation in short time. He finished so early. तुम्हाला अजून वेळ होता 15 मिनिट. Still okay, we'll go the question and session. We have a lot of eminent attendees are there. They can also ask the questions. I think Sadachar and our moderator, you should go ahead with asking the question. Chat box मध्ये questions आहेत.
Yes.
I have also questions I will ask later. Thank you.
Yes. There are certain questions which have been posted in the chat box. I would rather prefer to have those answered. The first question I think is to Dr. Charutta. What % of patients of recurrent STI have refractory errors?
Ma'am, I think, can you hear my voice?
Yes.
Okay. There's some problem with my screen.
Okay.
So actually, I would like to pass. I'm not able to place exact percentage. Like, would Dr. Atul be able to answer this question better?
About STIs, no?
Yes.
How much % would be having?
Yeah. See, I think about 15 to 20%. But the thing is, every month I see about 1 to 2 children who have been being treated recurrently for recurrent STIs and chalasia for 1 to 2 years, 2 to 3 years, but never have they been, even subjected to a refraction. So as a protocol, if we subject all of them to a refraction, see, all of them may not be reaching us. So when they are not getting okay, sometimes they reach us. But I would say about 15 to 20% of them have a underlying refractive error. This, we are not talking about one isolated episode of STI or chalasia. They're getting a chalasion here, then they're getting there. So just for one STI or chalasion, we don't do that. But anyway, if we get a 3-year-old child, we always love to refract him once, because we say, once he's come to us, we can just put a drop and see the basic refraction. So I don't think there's any harm in doing a refraction, but yeah, about 15 to 20%.
Thank you so much. Next question is for Dr. Charutta again. How do you differentiate between vascularized and neovascularized retina in ROP?
Vascularized means the normal vasculature. So that follows a particular pattern, like the vessels start from the optic disc, then you have the superior arcade, the inferior arcade, and they go on branching from there. But the new vessels, the new vascularization, the vessels are more flimsy and they are disorganized. So like somebody who's trained to look at the fundus can easily make out the difference. Like the caliber of the vessels is different, and the way they are running, like whether they are from the main vasculature branching from that or whether there's just a disorganized mass. So with that, you can make out the difference.
Thank you so much. Till what age should we send a child to pediatric ophthalmologist, especially for refractive errors? I think this is for a general refractive errors checkup. Is it mandatory to do screening for all children?
Yes, like every child before he enters school should have a proper, which is not the case actually. Many people do not follow it, but every child should have. And a pediatric ophthalmologist probably should see a child till he becomes 18 years of age, because things like amblyopia, which they are malleable to treatment in this age group. So that's something that might be missed later on. And many times, like I said, just it's the other way also, like a very small refractive error of 0.25, many times it's just prescribed without reason. So both ways, it's important for a pediatric ophthalmologist to see the child till 18 years, so you can make a proper decision on how much stress to give on the glasses.
Thank you, madam. When is the earliest age we can do a cover test for a child? I think Dr. Atul can take this.
I think I would say 6 months. But if the child, you can do a torchlight test for any child anyway, and you will also see any opacity in the pupillary area. You look at the pupillary responses. We can playfully cover each eye from a distance. They don't like being touched. So you can just keep your palm and show them an interesting object, and you can block the view but not touch them because they get irritable otherwise. And when you block the view of one eye, if you see the eye slipping out, you will be able to make out that there is a squint. Generally, beyond 6 months, you can easily do a alternate cover test, but from a distance. But and one more thing is whether you can see a small squint or no, but you can definitely see how the child is fixing. So we can just write fixing and following well with each eye. That ensures that there is some decent amount of almost equal vision in both the eyes. So if the child, the moment you cover one eye, if the other eye starts wandering, that means there is something wrong. So I would say beyond 4 months definitely, but a child who's in your who's head holding properly 6 to 7 months, you can definitely do it in the mother's lap. We like to do all these things when the child is in the mother's lap. Most of the times, if you have people with aprons in the room, and they have bad experience of the pediatrician's clinic, somebody. So when they come to our clinic, we are good people. We don't poke them. We only put drops in their eyes. So they generally are more cooperative.
Nowadays, we also don't look too attractive in the OPD.
With all those masks, definitely. So, but you can surely just flash a torch and cover each eye from a distance and see how the child is fixing and how is the pupillary reaction. So that is good enough view. If you have a direct ophthalmoscope, you can just look through the whole of the distant. You can do a distant direct ophthalmoscopy. So immediately you can see the red reflex. And nowadays, so many people have got phones. So you take a photograph with a flash. I would insist that it should be with a flash. If somebody is telling you the child has a squint, ask for a photograph with a flash. And in that, the reflex of the flash, if it is falling in the center of the pupillary area, sometimes the children, their photographs are with their face turned like this. So it gives the impression of a squint. So you hold their head straight and take a photo with a flash, you will be able to make out. Photography also is a helpful tool.
Thank you so much. Do we need to refer every child with head tilting, sir? Head tilting.
Yeah. Most of the times, the rest of the the gamut of investigations for a head tilt is a neuroimaging visit to a neurologist. I think it doesn't take much to rule out a misalignment of the eyes. And most of the times a head tilt is because of very a type of squint which most of the adult ophthalmologists wouldn't pick up, like a Brown syndrome. It's a very subtle finding. You have to keep watching the child for a while, or a Duane syndrome, which can be confused with a sixth nerve palsy. So, you know, as I said, if we see them first, most of the time Duane's is so common. I see one Duane syndrome per week. Even my optometrist is now so well trained that he writes Duane's type 1 and come, because we see so many of them. So I think a child with a head tilt or a turn, let's say both the things, tilt or a face turn, can be first evaluated by a pediatric ophthalmologist, and we rule out that there is no ocular cause for misalignment. Then you go ahead to the other causes of the head tilt.
Okay.
Dr. Charuta, do you?
Yeah, I would just like to add that uncorrected astigmatism also can be a cause of a head tilt. So here again, refraction is necessary. And a very simple test to rule out whether it is an ocular torticollis or whether it's because of musculoskeletal problems is we patch one eye. After patching one eye, if the head tilt disappears, then it is because of an ocular cause, because the child is trying to align the eyes or correct that astigmatism with the head tilt. So if we patch one eye, then he has no reason to tilt the head, then it goes. So if it's going, then it's more in favor of ocular head tilt. And if it's not, then maybe other investigations would be required.
Thank you, madam. One last question. What is the duration of massage for watering in newborn babies? For how much time should we massage the eyes, especially
it should be done like once you start doing it, you press it for about 10 times and do it 4 times a day. So it will be about 40 times a day, and you continue it till 1 year. If it has to go on its own with massage, it will go till 1 year. Beyond that, there's no point in waiting. Then we can go for probing.
Yeah, thank you so much, Madam Charuta and Dr. Atul Seth. I will hand over to Dr. Sadachar if there are any further questions from panelists.
I have a question, right, madam? You said that probing should wait till age of 1 year, right? But lot of times this patient came with eye discharge, recurrent eye discharge. How many times I can prescribe then antibiotic eye drops, right? And what are the classical indications so that I can prescribe, and for how much time, duration?
Antibiotic eye drops are otherwise safe, but you don't have to, like that whole 1 year, the child doesn't have to put the antibiotic eye drops. Antibiotic eye drops should be put only when there's a lot of purulent kind of discharge. Many times, once you give the antibiotic drops for about 15-20 days and the child and the parents are meticulously doing the massage, then beyond that, it becomes a watery kind of discharge, not a purulent discharge. Then you can stop the antibiotic drops and just continue the massage. So intermittently, sometimes when the child has a URTI, maybe that discharge might increase again. So that time you can prescribe the antibiotic drops, but it's not necessary to do it throughout the year. And why we wait for 1 year is that 90% of children will resolve with massage. So there is really no point in subjecting them to GA within the first year of life if 90% chances are there that they will resolve with massage.
Okay. Our vision president, Dr. Dabadkar sir is there. Sir, can you ask some question, right?
Sir. Yes, Dabadkar sir, can you have one
comments पण पाहिजे sir तुमच्या नाही question पण पाहिजे.
Dr. Atul Seth and Dr.
Hello, sir.
It was very good, very informative. Probably I would like to point out one fact that my references are to ophthalmic surgeon, and ophthalmic surgeon refers lot of cases to me. This inter-specialty reference, because probably I stopped reading ophthalmology after my marriage.
You don't have to, sir.
Encyclopedia is with me. So anyhow, Dr. Atul Seth or Madam Bapai, I would like to ask, and just I was attending one neurology webinar. There are a lot of reference to ophthalmic surgeon for headache. So how refraction is the commonest cause of headache in pediatric practice?
Charuta, you'd like to take this?
Yeah, so refractive error is one thing, and other things also, like convergence insufficiency. Sometimes in small children, like now with increased near activity, they have to converge their eyes constantly to study or to do whatever activities they're doing. And if those muscles are weak, also it can lead to a headache. So that is another cause. And again, any child who complains of any person for that matter who complains of a headache, we have to see the optic disc to rule out a papilledema. So I think all these things are necessary, and in elder people, intraocular pressure. So headache will involve all these options, not just refractive errors.
Yes. Probably
Sometimes we do see a very flimsy power 0.25, 0.5 being prescribed to children, as Dr. Charuta already pointed out. We may see this refractive error, but in that case, we tell them that your headache is not because of your eyes. Then you need to work out on the other, because very often, sometimes these children are given a 0.25 cylinder, 0.5 this thing, so that also has to be stressed, because then they'll keep wearing the glasses and think that the headache is going to vanish. So either it can be a significant refractive error, and second, as she pointed out, an ocular motility disturbance, generally the convergence weakness, but that will present in children, I think, more in 7th grade, 8th grade. Nowadays, with more increased near activity, you are seeing it in younger children also. So there are a lot of people who have a convergence insufficiency, but say a farmer will generally not present with it, but a person who has to sit on the computer all the time will be very symptomatic. So very often they are given glasses and they are sent away, but the ocular motility balance is not checked. So you have to check how are they converging, is there any latent squint for near? And for them also, this vision therapy is a very effective therapy. We teach them once or twice, and then they can do these sessions at home.
Dr. Hemant want to ask some question, right?
Yeah, Dr. Hemant sir.
I will go with 3 issues. First of all, already was what was asked की headache आणि refraction मध्ये काय correlation आहे का? एक गोष्ट. दुसऱ्या वेळेला बऱ्याच वेळेला म्हणतात की ऑप्टोमेट्रिस्ट म्हणतात नाही नाही त्याला झिरो चष्मा दिलाय त्याच्यामुळे ते हेडेक जाईल वगैरे. So regarding this one concept, then I will come to the second issue. The clear-cut message for this, whether headache we should order for refractive error or not.
Yes, for headache, refractive error has to be the first thing that is ruled out. But these small power glasses, which are just prescribed as headache glasses, are many times to increase the sale of glasses. They do not have any.
There was an ophthalmologist in Nanded who told me, because we give 0.5 or something. So he told me, do you know, here people prescribe 0.12. 0.12 is as good as nothing. So I started laughing. He said, बाळा आमच्या इकडे ज्याला नाक असतं त्याला चष्मा देतातच. तुला नाक असलं की तुला चष्मा देणार. So you probably can get, there's a commercial angle. You have a nose to hold the glass, they'll give it to you, but they're not required.
Who can give contact lenses?
So there is no zero chashma, one thing. Second issue, the exact method of doing massaging, and if madam can demonstrate that exact method of massaging, whether it's clockwise, anti-clockwise, 10 times, that 4 times a day, but we can wait for 1 year. But as a precaution for all pediatricians, I want to state that though we can wait for 1 year, but once it should be documented by the pediatric ophthalmologist on the paper for that massage. It's always better to have that documentation on the paper. Yes, madam, how can you demonstrate that exact?
Sir, is my video visible to you? Because
yes,
okay.
Yes,
okay.
yes.
Okay. So basically, it's this area that is between the eye and the nose. म्हणजे पेशंटला सांगताना बेसिकली डोळा आणि नाक ह्याच्या मधला जो खड्डा येतो, there we have to press downwards and inwards towards the nose. That is the area of the lacrimal sac. And it's important to tell the mother to keep her nails short, especially if it's a very small child. Whatever oil they use for applying to the body of the baby, they can just lubricate the finger a bit, keep the nail short, and they can press here. Many times it is taught to pull the finger down. So that is not really necessary, because the lacrimal duct has nothing to do with this area. And while pulling it down, all the pressure comes here, which is really not serving any purpose. So it is to be towards the nose and in. And if it's bilateral on both sides, otherwise they can just do it on one side. It's not necessary to keep doing it on both sides, so that the pressure goes to the right place.
Okay, so it should be rotated anti-clockwise or clockwise. Is any method for that, or not, just to massage?
No, you just need to press it in and down. It's not really necessary to rotate it at all.
Okay, and the third issue which I wanted to ask, that already it has been mentioned regarding retinopathy of prematurity. Already we had one case on the doctor's day. We had a major compensation for not documenting ROP. But the thing what I want to ask, is there any protocol with the NICU graduate after coming to general pediatrician? As a general pediatrician, how should be the follow-up for ROP from our side? Because many times when they leave the NICU, they don't go back for that screening. So when they come to our OPD, what should be the protocol of following for ROP? Is there any specific date and deadlines to follow?
The first checkup has to be, like I said, at 4 weeks. But if it hasn't happened at that time, you can call the ophthalmologist in the NICU itself. But if for any reason, I think that is actually the best, to call in the NICU. So the child is there and the first checkup will happen. Because once you discharge the baby, then you have no control whether they will actually go or not. So that would be the best protocol. And if at all, like the child comes to the general OPD and has not had any checkup before, then whenever you see the child should have. So it's not like now the child is 4 months old, but the child at least at that time have a checkup. Maybe like you might have missed the golden period, but then it's always better rather than not checking at all.
Just why am I highlighting this point? This is concerned with all the pediatricians. Whenever the child leaves NICU, they don't follow with the NICU, and something happens, it is not detected when they come for our routine OPD. We don't stress on that. And there's a one case law key in the general pediatrician are not advised to go for the screening of the ROP. So as a general pediatrician also, whenever there is a NICU is not there followed up, but when they come to us, in the history of NICU is there, we should always go for the checking of the ROP, should be checked on our side also. That is it.
Okay. Any other questions from panelists, esteemed panelists?
Yes, I want to ask Madam.
It's a very common question, very commonly asked by parents nowadays, because their kids are getting more and more exposure to screen because of their classes. So what is the recommended screen time at different ages, at 2 year, 3 year, 4 year?
Frankly, there is no simple answer to this. Various associations have come out. The Chinese with a different one, the Americans with a different one. Like below 1 year, it is absolutely no. I think below 2 years, absolutely no screen time. So we can't really pinpoint an answer there. But then we have to answer something. So what I feel is, see, there are two issues. If the child is on the screen full time, his exposure to the natural light reduces, and natural light definitely has a role in myopia progression. Prolonged near activity increases myopia. That is debatable. It's not really proven, but yeah, it may have some role. So the thing is, I think in the present scenario, what I advise is whatever is academic screen time, you can't help. Besides that, the TV viewing may not be as harmful as the mobile viewing, but generally we just say 1 hour. But frankly, we've had so many debates on this. So, whether it is 1 hour or 4 hours, I think you can safely choose half an hour to 1 hour of mobile time and half an hour to 1 hour of TV time. Lesser than that, you won't be able to negotiate for also. And more than that, as a pediatrician, you can't advise. But in China, it's more stringent. They have come up with, because there is an epidemic, myopia is widespread. So in all these Southeast Asian countries and all, myopia is more prevalent. And there is a definite role that outdoor activities help. So it's like a correlation. When they are on the screen, they don't go outdoors. Those children who are more on the iPad and all. But I guess 1 hour is a good answer for the mobile iPads and all. And nowadays, the whole equation has changed because there is 4 to 5 hours of academic screen time. So you can probably tell them that have outdoor activity, but I don't know how in the era of Corona.
Now in case of infants also, they keep on showing on the cartoons of the infants also.
That is an easy way of feeding the child. Let's blame they don't blame the infant.
But whether that care has to be taken, but that care has to be taken by the mother or not.
Yeah. So see, that's that is that's an easy way of feeding the child. But I think we have to tell the mother that you are the one who's developing this Pavlov's conditioned reflex, and then you are the one complaining about it.
Want to ask.
I know it.
Sir, I would like to just bring up one issue, which nowadays these drug companies are coming up with antioxidant tablets or gummies for children. and they come and advertise it to us that you prescribe it to children and that will keep their eyes safe from the screen. As ophthalmologists, we don't really see any role of prescribing those medications, but as are they harmful? Like, they are not useful that we know, but are they harmful? Like, that's what I would like to actually ask the pediatricians. Like, is it really necessary for children to be eating antioxidants at that age?
No,
Absolutely not.
no, they are
As
not
they are
at
not
all
useful.
advised actually.
There's no use of really using them.
Rather eating chocolate, you can advise it.
And unnecessary.
1500
Coloring agents are there in that.
Correct.
Dr. Babadkar sir, coloring agents are there.
Sugar, coloring agents, all unnecessary
Avoid.
things.
Dr. Ganguly asked, somebody asked a very good question regarding screening time. And as it is, as you said very correctly, below 2 years, nil, nothing. And as Hemant pointed out, nowadays in our OPD or IPD, we see that every parent uses this. Screening time, exact answer will be American Academy of Pediatrics says that screening time should be less than 12 to 14 hours per week. And screen means your mobile, your TV, and your laptop, all these things, less than 14 hours. But unfortunately, we have some different days now, and we have to set up our limitations in different way because of this COVID pandemic, and so many activities are going on screen, especially e-learning is going on. And Indian Academy of Pediatrics is coming with their specific guidelines within few days. Even my colleague Dr. Swati Ghate from Jaipur, she's working a lot on this screening time, and even academic in the adolescent age is working a lot on that. But I would like to ask you, Dr. Atul, there is some rule. वो मिसेस दाभड़कर मुझको बोलती है और बहुत तंग कर दी, ये क्यों नहीं बोला आपने? तो मैं आपको
2020
that is really useful, and every pediatrician should know so that they can advise their
I think it's quite commonly said 2020. You mentioned that, Dr. Charuta.
Yes, I already mentioned.
You mentioned that.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Every 20 minutes.
Yes.
Every 20 minutes, you look for 20 seconds at a distance of 20 feet. That is.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
There are two purposes. One, you get a break. Secondly, when you look at a distant object, some children with prolonged near activity, they go into an accommodative spasm. So because of ciliary muscle spasm. So this kind of breaks that also. But I would also like to mention there's a lot of over-the-counter or online sale of these computer block glasses and all that. I think it does the optician more good than to the child, because we've been debating in our pediatric groups about it. There's nothing saying that it really harms your eyes, but I think your own natural lens is there to block the UV light, and you don't need somebody. So many years we have been without these UV blocking light. Now suddenly, because they have launched these blue block glasses, you're not really sure whether they are beneficial or harmful. You'll come to know only after prolonged studies, because so I think and they're feeling very happy, and parents are always ready to spend on exclusive things for their children if it's for their health. We need to just tell them that this is not scientifically proven. So just because without a glass also the children are wearing blue block glasses, I don't think it will really make too much of a difference, more of a psychological difference. Yeah, they may need tear substitutes. We do write a lot of tear substitutes because there's a lot of iatrogenic dry eye because of too much screen time. You can also safely write tear substitutes like refresh tears, teardrops, because a lot of them are having that problem, and these are not steroids or anything. But again, they should be discouraged from using these glasses. It will not do any harm, but they're not, except that they're spending their money unnecessarily on that.
And you can also activate the night mode on your device if at all you're so concerned about it. Glasses are not necessary.
Yeah, so even when I send children for glasses, I see sometimes the very average patient is fleeced of 10,000, 12,000 rupees for a glass. And besides feeling jealous about the optician earning more than me, I feel angry because he's just telling the parent, डोळ्यासाठी चांगलं आहे, याच्याने number कमी होईल. There is nothing like this. There is no glass which reduces your number. This is developmental myopia or astigmatism. We have no control over it, frankly. So, but when they are given to believe that this is going to stop their number from increasing and all, so you are fleecing the parent. That's not fair. So I think when I give them only, I tell them, you have money, you spend whatever. But if you think that these specialized coatings are going to stop your child's number from increasing, you are mistaken. So, you know, they already I prime them and send them to the optician. Similarly, for that eye yoga and all that, I frankly, Dr. Charuta has not encountered that much in Nasik. Before that, she was in Shankar Netralaya. So you don't see that. But in private practice, when you tell the parent that, listen, glasses are the only treatment, surgery is the only treatment, the number may increase with age. These are not things which they want to hear. So then we have so many parallel doctors in our families and our neighbors. They don't need to really be educated about it. They will tell you, they see an ad in midday without any personal experience, they send them there. The patient goes for 20 sessions per person in the train. They spend about 20 to 25,000. Then their numbers are checked on their charts, you know, and they are told that the number has reduced. When they come back to us, the number is the same. Somehow they still are very happy that they have done all this exercise. But I think this is cheating. And because these particular agencies, don't fall in that purview of that we fall in. You can't even take them to court. Ideally, I think they should be taken to court, but nobody really bothers. So you need to warn them that all these things like vision yoga and whatever nonsense you see on teleshopping network, you know, there are glasses with holes. They are no use. So we should actively discourage them. We should not just, when they ask us, we should tell them all this is not going to work, because they are going to fall into that trap. Even vitamin A, you know, the mother is after the child with a glass of carrot juice, and then she's so stressed that he's not having it. This is not a vitamin A deficiency, myopia. So, you know, we don't see it in the cities, at least we don't see it very commonly. So you just tell them that you take it easy. There's no special diet. They don't like all this when we tell them that there's no special diet, but that's the truth.
We only 2-3 minutes last.
One question: role of eye drops having steroids from pediatrician desk.
We would like to suggest that without, like I said, without a slit lamp examination, steroids should not be started at all.
Even in online, we don't start.
Right.
Even in online, we don't start steroids. We tell them, if you come to the clinic, I'll give you. Even if we are pretty sure that. I don't think steroids should be given by anybody.
Is there any specific indication for that? Because it is not promoted to general practitioners, and these eye drops containing steroids are largely used over the counter also. So that any specific
green bottle.
Yes, any specific indication for the use of steroid from our desk?
No.
You should chemists shop, general practitioners, these things, steroids totally to be discouraged, because you can have a disaster. If there's a fungal abscess, if there is a viral epithelial lesion, you're going to cause a disaster, and you cannot make out on torchlight. So you can stick with plain antibiotic and lubricants.
Ophthalmology association should go to the court and against the pharma companies in the banning that steroid drops.
Right.
No, they
are lawyers, so a lot of times
we have to use them. We need them. We can't do without them. But even we need a slit lamp examination to see the slit lamp.
And long term, they cause glaucoma also.
Yeah.
One word regarding intraocular lens, which is implanted for congenital cataract. Does it require to change after the child grows?
No, it stays lifelong. That's why the IOL power calculation is very essential. So we keep them a little hypermetropic when they're small, so that hypermetropia will reduce with age, and then they'll become more or less emmetropic. If we make them emmetropic to start with, they'll end up with a myopia. So
we adjust a little for the growth of the eyeball.
Yeah.
And we give glasses for that in childhood, which they will gradually
and we don't implant before 1 year, because then the size and the inflammation, all that matters. Generally, it's better to implant an IOL only after 1 year.
Okay.
There's a question in chat box. When is the earliest age we can do a cover test for a child?
Cover test.
Question in chat box.
I think 6 months is by 6 months you can definitely do. Child of 6 months you can do. 6 months and beyond.
Okay.
Sadachar.
Hello. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. What is the incidence of glaucoma in children? Was last question only. Then I will hand over to Dr. Nilima.
Charuta.
Congenital glaucoma is a very rare disease. Like even in our OPDs, we see it quite uncommonly. And but one thing about congenital glaucoma is like in adult glaucoma, there are no symptoms if it's an open angle kind, and the patient loses vision before you can detect many times unless he's had a checkup.
Yes.
But the good thing about congenital glaucoma is that there are symptoms and signs. So if you see a large eye or a cloudy cornea or watering, the triad is like watering, photophobia, and ophthalmos, a large enlarged eye, then that could be congenital glaucoma, and that needs a referral. And probably that's the only condition which we need to like check under sedation or anesthesia, the IOP. Rest everything we can just restrain the child or make the child entertain the child and check in the OPD. But for intraocular pressure, we need to check it properly under sedation or anesthesia.
I think we should end this session. There is a call from DIP. We should go for thank you.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Over to Dr. Nilima, madam, for the
Unmute
vote of
kara.
thanks. Dr. Nilima, madam, please.
Can I have
Unmute kar, unmute.
Can I have 1 minute, please?
Yes,
Ah,
yes,
sir.
sir.
Yes,
Yes, sir.
yes.
Very good, Dr. Pandrikar sir, Dr. Sadachar, Maharashtra IIP. But moreover, I would like to congratulate Raigad IIP also, because this is our new team, and all our office bearers are ladies now, and they have started with a big show. Really, you are doing wonderful job, Dr. Madam Inge and Dr. Nilima Bhandarkar. Please accept my
Thank you.
compliments. Please
Nilima,
accept.
unmute kar, unmute.
Thank you so much, sir.
Before Dr. Nilima speaks, happy birthday, Jay. Jay, तुला एक दो लाइन बाद जय बोला नंतर मॅडम कर जाऊ.
आता झाला माझा बर्थडे, हाच करायचा होता.
जय एक दो लाइन.
Thank you.
Hello,
Madam.
am I audible?
Hi,
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Go ahead. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, it's a wonderful session. We can hear all the lucid presentation, all clear-cut ideas, and equally beautiful pictures or photographs we have seen today. Almost all the common queries which we come across in the OPD are answered. It was wonderful presentation, and we are enlightened with pediatric ophthalmology session. Thank you, Dr. Charuta. Thank you, Dr. Atul. And thank you all DIIP members, Maharashtra IIP members, Dr. Jayan sir, Dr. Sadachar, our own Dr. Hemant Gangolia sir, Dabhadkar sir, all of you. And thank you, Sunita madam.
Bhandarkar sir.
My now like
Bhandarkar sir.
त्यांना बर्थडे गिफ्ट द्यावं लागेल आज.
Birthday boy. He's a
बर्थडे
birthday
गिफ्ट
boy.
द्यावं लागेल.
Thank you.
I think I should also
Thank you very much,
Thank
Atul
you
sir, Charuta ma'am. Thanks a lot.
Excellent,
Thank
excellent. You know, the excellent presentation. Thank you, DIP madam,
Thank
for
you.
cooperation and extending time 10 minutes for us.